Welcome to Sprinkle with Hope podcast and your host Shane. And today we're going to talk about consistency. What I want to mention first is that this is our 100th podcast. We finally made it to 100. I don't know that I thought about that when we started, but I heard the other day that only 10% of all new podcasts reach 100 episodes or a year, and that seriously is amazing to me that we've come so far, but yet it feels like we're just starting. So we're going to talk about consistency. Of course, I'm going to start with a quote by Peggy Noonan. She says, "Part of courage is simple consistency." And I love that. I love the simplicity of things. I like to break it down to simple. That allows me to really see the true meaning of things. And so I just felt like to have courage is to simply be consistent. And I just love that quote. We're talking on our podcast and talking about consistency. Jason and I, when we first talked about this, even doing a podcast, we talked about it, we prepared for it. Then we just started recording and we did it over and over and over. And we just committed to doing it. That's really how we got to this point. We committed to doing our podcast and we just decided to do it. So today we're going to be talking about consistency.
I love it. And Shane and I really are excited about this episode, it being our 100 episode. And it actually hits the the day after our 1 year anniversary of having Sprinkle with Hope podcast. So thank you all for being a part of it. Um, Again, I think consistency, as we talk about consistency today, one of the things you need to understand is that there may be bumps in the road and there may be things that get in your way or whatever. And some of that has been the case for Shane and I. As we started this podcast, we've had various different issues, audio, video, all kinds of problems. Um, and so, but we've been consistent. And one of the things we also wanted to mention is that part of that consistency is knowing when to scale back. And that Shane and I have done that. We used to do 2 podcasts a week, and now we do one because we wanted to keep that consistency and not have it burn us out. So, as we talk about that, keep that in mind too. I also want to just kind of start with the quote. Shane and I love quotes. And Tony Robbins, he's amazing. He's an American motivational speaker. And he said this: in essence, if we want to direct our lives, we must take control of our consistent actions. It's not what we do once in a while that shapes our lives, but what we do consistently. And I totally believe that to be true. The Latin root word for consistent means standing firm or still. And I just kind of wanted to mention that too I love definitions. I think you guys, if you've listened to any episodes of mine, Shane and I's, like, I love those definitions because I think it helps us. Also, the Oxford Dictionary states that consistent means compatible or in agreement with something. And so think about that as we're talking about consistency today.
That's awesome. I just felt like I should point out the fact this is our 100th episode. And to date, Jason and I have only come up once with the same quote. And that's just to me amazing that we focus on the same topic and content, but we tend to gravitate towards those things that speak to us. And I think that also in turn speaks to each one of you. You know who we are and where we start to trend. And so I just felt like that was interesting to share. I have another quote by Jacob A. Riis, Riis, and it's a little bit long, but I wanted to just take a minute to share this with you. It was so powerful when I saw this. He says, "Look at a stone cutter hammering away at his rock, perhaps 100 times without as much as a rock showing in it, or sorry, perhaps 100 times without as much as a crack showing in it. Yet at the 101st blow, it will split in two. And I know it is not the last blow that did it, but all that had gone before.
Mm.
I just thought that was so amazing that I could visualize this person hitting a rock 100 times and thinking, this thing is not even showing any cracks. And the next time it hits, it just splits into two. And I think that goes along with anything. Anytime you're consistent at something, it might not be today that you see that breakthrough or that crack in the stone, but if you just keep consistently doing it, then you're going to eventually see it. I have shared personally that I played soccer most of my life. I started when I was 5. My freshman year in high school, I got the award to that I shot the most shots on goal without scoring. And I thought, that could have discouraged me, but I wanted to put in the effort to become a better soccer player and just be consistent about that. Well, fast forward a few years to my senior year, and I'm not saying this to brag. I'm just showing you a personal experience that I had where I had an award that might have crushed me. I I consistently put in the effort and time. My senior year, I was nominated to be co-MVP of the team. I was actually nominated to be on the very first Utah All-Star team for the whole state. That was just nominated by all the coaches. I felt like it was a huge honor, and that was my defining moment of saying, I made it. I made it to the point where I cracked that stone in half because of my consistent effort that I felt like I was always a good soccer player, even though I got the award for taking the most shots on goal without scoring. That was fine. It didn't deter me. I had my vision in mind of where I wanted to be. And so that's just a personal experience I wanted to share. I don't share it to brag or boast. I'm just simply saying that if you're consistent and you can see where you want to go, put in the effort every day and you'll get there.
I love that, Shane, and thanks for sharing that. I know you've shared that before about getting that award that would probably deflate most,
Yep.
Um, but and I also have to think back, when I think of being consistent, it takes me back to my flight instructor days when I was a helicopter flight instructor, and it is true that as you are more consistent, I found that students that really were there on a every other day basis or on a very consistent basis progressed more than the ones that showed up once every 2 weeks or once a month or whatever. But there's a couple things I wanted to share, and they might be a little bit long, but just a few things that I want you guys to grasp from that. So there's, and some of you may have heard this, but there's Newton's first law of motion, which says anything at rest will stay at rest, and anything in motion will stay in motion until acted upon by an unbalanced force. And you may be wondering why I bring up Newton's first law of motion, but I also, before I mention that, I want to talk about Newton's third law of motion, which is for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. You guys have maybe heard this from science class or whatever, but this was the guts of my flight instructor days. I absolutely spent a lot of time teaching this to students and what it really meant. But think about that. I want you to think about being consistent. And if you're at rest, well, you're going to stay at rest. You're not going to go anywhere. But consistency, or being consistent, if you're in motion, you're going to stay in that motion and you're going to continue to move until acted upon by some other force outside of yourself. And so I want you to think about that as we're talking about consistency, Newton's first law of motion and Newton's third law of motion, and kind of how that will affect you in being consistent.
That's awesome. Very cool. So I wanted to share some tips that I came up with and found that create that consistency and that consistent mindset. Because I think often it's not we want to do it, but it's often our mind that we have to overcome. So here's some tips that I want to share. Set up a morning routine. So start your day off right. Whatever that looks like for you, do the same thing to start your morning routine. And that hopefully will get your life on the right track every single day. Do things even when you don't feel like it. So if you're not feeling it, do it anyway. If you're sad, do it anyway. If you're too busy, do it anyway. If you're exhausted, do it anyway. If you're feeling great, do it anyway. If you're stressed, do it anyway. And if you're not motivated, do it anyway. I just think there's sometimes we get these things get in the way of that consistency. We just need to do it. That's really what, when it comes down to it, we just have to do it. We can focus on the process and not just the outcome. So we can focus on what we're going through and not the outcome or the desired outcome. Take responsibility for showing up and not the result. So let's say you're focusing on losing weight versus exercise. So which one are you focused on? Are you focused on losing weight? Or are you focused on exercise? So often we're focusing on losing weight versus the process of the exercise that we have our body in that motion, and that consistency hopefully will allow us to lose the weight. But if we're focused on just losing weight, I think we're losing the focus on the process or the exercise or whatever we do to get to that point. Be kind to yourself. I think often we beat ourselves up and we're like, oh well, I wanted to exercise 5 days a week, but I did 4 this week. That's okay. Just improve today, set that daily routine and go after it. I often talk about avoiding the noise around us and decreasing that noise. That's that distraction that I see. It could be physical noise. It could be anything that's getting in the way of consistently showing up. And then some of you may or may not have heard about the story of the tortoise and the hare. There's a race that a tortoise, which typically is slow, is racing a hare or a rabbit, which is very quick. And the tortoise takes its time, consistently gets at the same exact speed. The hare runs and stops, and is thinking, oh, I'm going to beat this tortoise because he's so slow. But the tortoise eventually wins because he's consistent. He sets his speed and he consistently goes at that speed. And so those are just some tips that I wanted to share of how we can each gain that consistency in our life.
Yeah. So here's probably the second time that we've ever had anything that's gone over, and I'll have some of those similar tips, but I'll kind of put my spin on it here in a minute. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about, and again, don't mind if I nerd out for a minute from my helicopter instructor days, but there are 4 levels of learning. And I think that this is really important to understand because I think it can help you in trying to be consistent if you know how you learn. So the first level of learning is rote memorization, which is the ability to repeat what has been learned without understanding why you're doing it. So you just simply are just doing it because somebody either told you to do it or you read it in a book. So you're just doing whatever that thing is. It's called rote memorization. The second level of learning is understanding. So understanding is being able to comprehend what is being taught or used. And so if you understand what you're now doing from that rote memorization, now you can take that and make it a little bit better, which is the third level, which is application. And application is taking what you understood and now you're going to apply it to whatever it is you're doing. And the fourth level of learning, which is the highest level of learning, which is correlation. And correlation is taking what has been learned, understood, and applied and being able to relate it back to other concepts you've already learned. So correlating two different things that you've learned together. Why do I mention that? Because I think it's super helpful when you're trying to be consistent. You may not understand what it is you're doing or why you're doing it. That could just be that rote memorization level. And then when you understand, now you know, okay, well, so now the next level would be application. And then I can correlate that back to something else I learned. So I think those are really, really important. Aristotle, a Greek philosopher, said, "We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit." And I thought that was so great because I truly believe that it is what we repeatedly do. So Shane said his things that he does to help be consistent. I just wanted to go over some of them. Some of them are going to be similar, but one, have a morning routine. Shane already kind of mentioned that, just having something to get your day started. The second is do whatever it is that you do not feel like doing, right? Just do it. Take that Nike motto.
Yeah.
The third thing is let your old self image go. So, learning about neuroplasticity, when you are rewiring your mind, you need to let go of your old patterns to make room for new ones. So, just let go of what it is you think that you are and bring in those new consistent patterns that you want to do or take part of. The fourth is focus on the process and not the results. Shane mentioned that. Um, Fifth thing, being kind to yourself. And I found it interesting that almost most of those were very similar in what Shane said and what I said, but I truly believe those. And so I'm backing Shane up and saying that these things really are important. There are 5 steps that we can do to help us become consistent.
That's awesome. Maybe I spoke too soon on this and jinxed ourselves, but I do think it is important to focus on those things. And, maybe that's why we both came up with those things. Um, I wanted to also share a quote by Anthony Robbins. We love quotes. We actually have quoted him quite a few times. I think he has some great things to say. So he says, "It's not what we do once in a while that shapes our lives. It's what we do consistently." And I agree. I think we just have to have a routine. We just have to do it. We had talked about a podcast for just a short time. We prepped for it. We prepared for it, and then we're just doing it. From our listeners in the US to India to France to Canada to all over the world, I want to truly thank you from the bottom of my heart for helping us on this journey to get to 100 episode. To me, that's an amazing feat, and we feel like we're just starting. We love listeners from all over. Hopefully, someday we can meet any one of you. We really appreciate it. I have learned a lot in this journey. One of them is to be consistent and show up. If we have a recording, then we just do it. If really anything, it has really taught me a lot about myself and the journey that we're on. Truly, we feel like we're just starting this. I feel like we're going to be consistent no matter what, because we decided to do something and we're just doing it. So that was what I wanted to end with.
Awesome. I have just a few more things that I want to share with you guys. One of those is real quick. Don't let self-doubt creep in. I think oftentimes that can help kind of discourage you from being consistent. There's a difference between wishing for something and being able to receive it. Are you really ready to receive what it is you really want and truly desire and want to be consistent with? So those are just 2 things I wanted to mention. And then here's kind of an interesting flip on this too. What's the difference between traction and distraction? I wanted to kind of talk about that for just a minute. But traction is the support or interest that is needed for something to make progress or succeed. And distraction is a thing that prevents someone from giving full attention to something else. And so I wanted to kind of mention that as you're being consistent, is it something that's gaining traction or distraction? Are we getting distracted by something, or are we gaining traction by being consistent and now it's really gaining that momentum? Tom Kite, an American golfer, said you can always find a distraction if you're looking for one. So I truly think that to be true. If you're wanting to find something, you're going to find it. Um, if I continue doing what I am about to do today for the next 5 years, will I have more of what I want or less of what I want? So I want you to think about that. If I start doing today what I want to do for the next 5 years, will I have more of what I want or less of what I want? James Clear, an American author, said, I accumulated small but consistent habits that ultimately led to results that were unimaginable when I started. And lastly, Viktor Frankl, an Austrian neurologist and a Holocaust survivor, and his story is phenomenal. He has a book out. It's amazing. But he said this in his book. He said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom, which really is quite small if you think about it, that space in between there. But here he was, in a concentration camp, and he was able to find freedom to be able to choose what it is that he wanted to do, his response to that particular stimulus. So, what is our stimulus? Everything that is thrown our way each day. Someone cuts us off while you're driving. Your friend gets in a car accident. You find out you lose your job. Right? Those are some things that are stimulus. And then, what would be the response? How we choose to react. Think about the difference between two people in the exact same situation. One may feel hopeless, and the other, would be, oh man, I feel so blessed. And they could literally be in the same situation. So why is it so different when we're talking about consistency? What is that response that we're trying to do? If something gets hit with us and it says, oh well, that just messed up my consistency, I must be a failure or whatever, insert the nasty word. Or could it be, okay, so I fell off the wagon, or I didn't, keep my consistency. And so now I need to try a little bit harder, need to do a little bit better. So, Shane and I said it, I'll say it again, be kind to yourself. I think that's truly probably one of the best things that you can do when you're trying to be consistent is just keep moving forward. Be patient with yourself, be patient with others. If somebody cuts you off in front of you, maybe think, oh, there must be a reason as to why they did that. Are they in a hurry? Their wife having a baby, an accident. I don't know. And so don't get mad at them. Maybe we just think about it in a different context.